Please, don't close this yet. There is something the person you love has been struggling to say, and if you could hear the thoughts they have been too afraid to put into words, you might finally understand why everything between you has felt so confusing lately. Because beneath the silence, beneath the distance, beneath those moments when you wondered whether they still cared, there may be a much deeper fear hiding. The fear of losing you. But here is what makes this complicated. If they are so afraid of losing you, why haven't they simply told you? Why did they become quiet when they should have spoken? Why did they sometimes pull away when all you wanted was clarity? And most importantly, what happened that suddenly made the possibility of losing you feel real? That is where this story begins. There may have been a moment recently when something changed inside them. It might not have looked important from the outside. Maybe you stopped reaching out as much. Maybe your replies became shorter. Maybe you simply stopped trying so hard to fix something you did not break. Whatever it was, they noticed. And for the first time, they may have realized something they had avoided admitting for far too long. You were no longer waiting in exactly the same way. That realization can hit harder than any argument. Because sometimes people do not understand how important someone is while that person keeps showing up. They become comfortable with their presence. Comfortable with their patience. Comfortable believing there will always be another conversation, another opportunity, another chance to explain. Until something changes. Until the person who always cared begins protecting their own heart. And suddenly, the silence feels different. Now imagine the person you love sitting alone with that realization. They remember conversations differently. They replay moments they once dismissed. They think about words they should have said and questions they should have answered. And one thought keeps returning. What if I waited too long? But that is only the first layer. Because there is something else they may be afraid to admit. They might have believed you would never actually walk away. Not because they wanted to hurt you. Not necessarily because they took you for granted intentionally. But because your care felt so consistent that they began treating it like something permanent. You forgave. You understood. You waited. You gave space. You tried to read between the lines when they refused to explain what was happening inside them. And perhaps somewhere along the way, they became convinced that no matter how confusing things became, you would still be there. Until they sensed something different in you. A quiet shift. You stopped chasing answers with the same urgency. You stopped needing every silence explained. You began realizing that love should not constantly leave you wondering where you stand. And that may have frightened them more than anything you could have said, because anger still shows attachment. Questions still show investment, even arguments can mean someone is still fighting for the connection. But when someone becomes quiet after trying for a long time, that silence can mean something completely different. It can mean they are learning how to let go. And if the person you love senses that happening, there may be words building inside them right now that sound something like this. Please don't give up on me yet. I know I made this harder than it needed to be. I know there were moments when you needed honesty and I gave you silence. There were times you probably wondered if you mattered to me. You did. You still do. I just didn't know how to show you without becoming vulnerable in ways that terrified me. But there is a reason vulnerability frightened them. And this is where the story goes deeper. Sometimes the person who appears least emotional is actually the person fighting the strongest internal battle. They may have learned long ago that getting attached means giving someone the power to hurt them. So when their feelings for you became deeper, instead of moving closer, they protected themselves. They hesitated. They overthought. They pulled back. They told themselves they needed time. But what they did not understand was that while they were protecting themselves from being hurt, they may have been hurting you. And now they are facing the consequence they feared most. Losing the person they were trying so hard not to need. Think about that contradiction. They created distance because caring felt dangerous. Then the distance itself became the thing that could cost them the connection. And there may have been one specific moment when they finally understood this. Perhaps they imagined you with someone else. Someone who answers the questions they avoided. Someone who does not make you guess. Someone who chooses you openly instead of expecting you to decode mixed signals. That thought may have forced them to confront a painful question. What if someone else gives them everything I was too afraid to give? And suddenly, jealousy is not really about another person. It is about regret. Because they know what you offered. They remember how you listened. How you noticed little things. How you cared even when you were uncertain whether that care was being returned equally. Those memories become heavier when someone realizes they might never experience them again. But don't misunderstand this. Missing someone does not automatically mean a relationship should be restored. Fear of losing you is not the same as being ready to love you properly. And beautiful words alone cannot repair what repeated confusion damaged. That is why what comes next matters more than any dramatic confession. If the person you love truly does not want to lose you, there is something they eventually have to understand. They cannot ask you to stay while continuing the same behavior that made you consider leaving. They cannot expect your heart to survive forever on possibilities. Something has to change. And perhaps that is the realization they are finally approaching. Because when someone truly believes they may lose you, all the excuses that once felt reasonable begin sounding different. I wasn't ready. I didn't know what to say. I needed more time. I thought you understood. Suddenly, none of those explanations erase the possibility that you could be gone. And that possibility forces a choice. Remain silent and risk losing you. Or become vulnerable and finally tell the truth. But what truth? This is the part they may have struggled with the longest. Maybe the truth is not simply, I love you. Maybe it is much more difficult. I needed you more than I ever admitted. There is a difference. Saying, I love you, can sound beautiful. Admitting, I needed you, exposes vulnerability. It means acknowledging that your presence changed something in their life. That your absence would leave a space. That despite every attempt to appear unaffected, they became emotionally attached to something they could not easily replace. Maybe you became the person they wanted to tell things to. The person whose name they looked for. The person whose opinion mattered more than they admitted. The person they thought about after conversations ended. And perhaps they assumed there would always be more time. More time to explain. More time to become ready. More time to say what they felt. Until now. Because there is something about the possibility of an ending that makes people suddenly understand the value of everything they postponed. And if they could send you one completely honest message with no pride standing between you, perhaps it would say, "Please read this before you decide I never cared. I know my actions may have confused you. I know silence can look like indifference. But there were things happening inside me that I never knew how to explain. I was afraid of how much you mattered. I thought keeping some distance would keep me safe. Instead, I created the very distance that could make me lose you. And now I am terrified that when I finally find the courage to tell you everything, you will no longer be waiting to hear it." Those words might be powerful. But there is still something you need to hear. Do not let the fear of losing someone become the only reason a relationship survives. You should not have to disappear for someone to recognize your value. You should not have to become unavailable before someone decides to communicate. Real love cannot live forever inside hidden thoughts. Eventually, it must become visible. Through honesty. Through consistency. Through effort. Through choices. So if the person you love ever comes to you saying, "I don't want to lose you," do not only listen to those 6 words. Listen carefully to what comes after them. Are they willing to explain what happened? Are they willing to hear how their actions affected you? Are they ready to change the patterns that created the distance? Are they choosing you because they genuinely understand your value, or simply because losing access to you suddenly scares them? That distinction changes everything. Because the confession is not the ending of this story. It is the test. And there is one final truth hidden beneath the message they may be trying to send you. Perhaps the thing they fear losing most is not simply your presence. It is the version of themselves they discovered when they were with you. Maybe you made them feel understood. Maybe you made vulnerability feel possible. Maybe you reminded them that connection could still exist after disappointment. And losing you would force them to confront something painful. They had something meaningful in front of them. And fear almost convinced them to let it slip away. That is why this message feels urgent. Not because it is literally going to vanish, but because opportunities can. Feelings can change. People can heal. And someone who waits too long to speak may eventually discover that the person they expected to remain forever has finally learned how to move forward. So imagine one final moment. No games. No pride. No mixed signals. Just the person you love standing in front of you, knowing they have one opportunity to tell the truth. They look at you and say, "I don't know exactly when everything changed. Maybe it happened slowly. Maybe I realized it every time you were there when I needed someone. But somewhere along the way, you became more important to me than I was prepared to admit. I became afraid. And instead of telling you that, I became difficult to understand. I thought I had more time. I thought you would somehow know what I couldn't say. But you deserved clarity. You deserved effort. And if there is still any chance for us, I don't want to waste it hiding anymore. I don't want to lose you. And now the most important choice is not theirs alone. It is yours too. Because you are allowed to care deeply and still require consistency. You are allowed to love someone and still ask for clarity. You are allowed to hear their confession without immediately forgetting everything that brought you to this moment. If their feelings are real, they will not be afraid to prove them slowly. They will not demand instant forgiveness. They will not pressure you with urgency. They will understand that trust is rebuilt through what happens after the emotional words have been spoken. Maybe that is the answer to the mystery that began with their silence. They were not necessarily silent because nothing was there. Perhaps they were silent because admitting what was there required a courage they had not yet found. But courage delayed for too long can become regret. And love hidden for too long can become a story about what might have been.